I'm going to go over converting a repository from 6.5 to the structure that it requires to run on AEM as a cloud service. We're going to use the weekend sample project for this video. What I've done so far is I've downloaded the weekend sample project from Adobe's GitHub, and I've installed it on my localhost 4502, which is running 6.5. So you can see that the project is living here on my file system. You'll see all the main and expected project folders that exist in 6.5. So we have all, core, dispatcher, repository structure, etc., UI.apps and UI.content. Over here, the file that's currently open is the configuration file for the repository conversion tool that we're going to run to convert all this project into something that's relevant for AEM as a cloud service. I will go over all the different bits and pieces of the data points that exist in this file. In the meantime, just going to go over real quick of how I downloaded this project. So as I mentioned, it is available in Adobe's GitHub repository. And just to make it as complicated as possible for the purposes of this repository conversion, I went ahead and looked at the previous releases and chose the oldest one. So the oldest one is 0.02, and so this is the one I downloaded. You can get the source code from the zip file, and that's what I'm working with. So I downloaded the zip file, I extracted it, and this is what exists currently in my file system. In terms of this YAML file, which configures the repository conversion tool, that one is also downloaded from Adobe's GitHub. In this case, it's the repository migration tool, which is part of the AIO CLI tools. So the repository migration is one of the plugins that's available there. So if you scroll through here, you'll see all the different migration tools that exist as plugins. We went over the dispatcher conversion earlier. In this case today, we're working with the repository modernizer. So this guy here has a link to its configuration that you can look at, and it provides us access to the repository modernization script file, along with examples for each entry. So I downloaded this file and I created this YAML file that lives in the same folder as my project. And the other thing that I did was, just to make this conversion easier, an alias for the convert repo. So to convert a repo, you need to run this command, and I just create an alias for AEM as a service dash convert repo. And the reason I did that is because once you have aliases for these things, then you can just kind of type in AEM AACS and hit tab, and it'll auto-complete for you. So you'll be able to see what existing commands you've saved in your aliases, and you'll be able to easily find what you're looking for to start the conversion. So in this case, I'm going to run convert repo, but first I'm going to talk about what information is in this YAML file. The YAML file that you download from the GitHub repo, it generally has entries for all the different plugins, which is the dispatcher converter, the repository modernizer, the index converter, and the workflow migrator. But you don't have to fill them all in. You only need to fill in the one that you plan on using. So in this case, the repository modernizer. A lot of these entries actually just remain the same. So the group ID, for example, this stays the same. So I just pulled this from the parent POM, which is available here. So you've got COM Adobe AEM guides. I kept that same value. There's no reason to change it for our purposes. The parent POM then, it has some sub entries here. So the path, this I can just get from by copying the full path here, which is a feature that VS Code offers. Artifact ID, this also doesn't change. I pull it from the parent POM. App title, this is what's going to be filled in inside of the description. So I modified it just slightly. I just dropped the site's project piece for it. So it's just WKND. And then the version. So again, if you want to increment the version, you're welcome to, but I kept it all the same. Moving on into the all project. Again, artifact ID, I kept it the same as what it originally was. App title and version also. Moving into the project, so this is where you're going to be working with the configurations for your UI.apps and UI.content projects. So the project path, again, this is an absolute value. So this is going to point to just your root project where everything lives. So this is going to actually be the parent of your current UI.apps and UI.content folders. After that, you've got your existing content package folders that you want to migrate. So this is going to be an array. So you'll put in this case, it's UI.apps and UI.content. This is what the weekend project came with. But depending on your implementation, you might have existing content packages that you want to migrate. Moving on here, it gives you the opportunity to specify a relative path to your filter.xml file, but generally speaking, these just they stay the same, right? So you can see that the default path that it uses is the one that lives under meta-inf/vault/filter.xml, and that's exactly what happens already, right? So here we have our filter.xml file. It's using the default value. I personally haven't encountered any situations where my filter.xml is living anywhere else, so you probably don't need to put a value for this entry. Same thing for the JCR root folder. Again, it has a default value, which is the same one that it's using in our case, and I've never seen a situation where it's using anything else than the default. Moving on, the artifact ID, this I pulled from the parent POM. Be anything. Your app ID, which is going to dictate the name of the app folder under /apps and under /conf. The version, which I kept the same. The name of the core bundle, which is usually /core. And then lastly, the OSGI folders to rename. So in here, this is a one that you actually might need to modify. And you're going to have to look at what configuration folders that hold OSGI configs you have under your app folder. So in this case, you can see there's three. There's config, config.author, and config.publish. So that's what I'm listing here. So I'm listing them with absolute paths from the apps folder, and then with names of the folder that's going to create once the repository has been migrated. So I just kept them the same, but you might want to give them different names. You can also merge them by providing the same name for multiple folders. And that's really it for the configuration. I can go back into my terminal and run the conversion. So let me set that up. AEM as a cloud service dash convert repo. And that's gonna look at the configurations in the YAML file and create inside my existing project folder. It's gonna make a target folder, which has a project folder, a source folder, and in here we finally have our converted AEM project. So you're going to see that there's a couple new folders, and some of them have been removed. One of the new ones is ui.apps.structure, which is required for AEM as a cloud service. Another new one is the Analyze folder, which is a Maven project which will run a sequence of tests that simulate the ones that the Cloud Manager will run when you're building to AEM as a cloud service. So it's basically going to test your repository and your code. So now that we have this project, we can build it. So let me move into that folder. And the goal is to run this on the AEM as a cloud service local SDK, and I have a version of that running at 4504 for my port. So in order to install it there, I'm going to create a a profile with that port. So in my new projects pair in POM, I'm going to copy the existing profile, rename it to auto install package cloud, modify the port to be aem.cloud.port, and lastly create the aem.cloud.port variable. Okay, so when all this is done, I can once again go back to my terminal and run the maven clean install-p auto install package cloud. Okay, so this fails right away, and the reason is because there are some things that we do have to perform manually when we're doing this conversion. So in this case, it's telling us that the version for the core bundle is missing. And I'm not really sure why, but during the conversion, if you scroll all the way down into the dependencies of the all project, you'll see that the version of the core bundle is in fact missing. And so we can manually put it in. We know it's 0.0.2 because we didn't modify it. So once that's in, we can run the build once again. So you can see it's getting a little bit further this time, and then eventually it fails again. In this case, it's telling us that the package com.adobe.aem.guides.weekend.core.models, so the package in which our Sling models are stored, does not exist. So obviously it does exist. We can confirm that it did in fact make it across in the conversion, so it's right over here. The reason it's not found is because the UI.apps project, its POM file, is missing the core bundle as a dependency. And you can see that in the original project, so in this UI.apps where we started off, it does indeed have the core bundle as a dependency. So I'm just going to copy it from here and paste it into our converted UI.apps folder. I'm then going to run the build a third time. So now it's done. You can see that we have another error. In this case, it has to do with the analyzer. So the analyzer bundle is reporting a problem with the way our code is structured or our project is structured. In this case, it's saying that it's unable to build the resource for null and that importing java.star packages is not allowed. This coming from a bundle exception. I've been looking through the project for anything that is trying to import a java.star. I wasn't able to find anything that is doing that. You can see that if we do a search in the core project, which is the only one that would be importing Java files or Java packages, there actually isn't a java.star anywhere. So after a little bit of research, it just seems like that's a bit of an outdated error, and that if we go ahead and update the analyzer version, this error actually goes away. So it's probably not something that we need to worry about. It is something we have to fix manually though. So if we just go into our parent POM, you're going to see that we have an analyzer version near the top here. So it's using a rather old 0.0.12. The latest one as of now is version 1.46. So I'm going to update that and run the build one more time. Now that it's done, we can go into our browser and actually run the site. So you can see that we now do have an installed weekend site in our AEM sites module, and we can go ahead and open it. But as we know, just because the bundle installed doesn't mean it's actually working. So right away you can see that some pieces are missing, and if we open this up in preview mode, we do get an error, namely that the image list as a model cannot be resolved to a type. So what do we do now? Well, we look to see if our bundle is properly running in the OSGI console. And when we refresh our console, we can see that the Weak Insights project is just installed. It is not actually running. So if we look at what's going on, we can see that there's an issue in the sense that our org Apache Sling API request package is not available. Either it doesn't exist or the version that it offers is not provided by our AEM. So we can see and get a bit of a clue as to what might be happening. Usually when this happens, I like to see what our AEM instance does offer, and you can do that by opening up the dependency finder. So I'm going to paste this package and click find, and what you can see is that the package itself does exist. It's just that it's a version older than what our bundle is requesting. So we have 2.5 and it's requesting 2.6 or above. So what that probably means is that our bundle is requesting an SDK that's of a earlier version than what AEM is running on, right? So AEM has an older version of the bundle. It's probably running with an older version of the SDK. So at this point, this is kind of what would happen back in the day when you had an Uber jar that was older than you actually needed in your AEM instance. So if we look at what the conversion did, so it replaced the Uber jar with this AEM SDK API version, and this is the one that we're running with. If we look at what AEM has, we can open that up in main product information, and we can see that we're running with 2002.2 and we're requesting 2002.4. So we have two options. Either we request an AEM SDK API that matches the one that we have here, so we can copy this and plug it in here, or we can go on Adobe's software portal and download the latest version of the AEM SDK, and then restart our instance with that. So we're gonna go with keeping the same API version as the converter provided, which is the latest one. If you do ever opt to roll back an SDK though, just a quick note on that, it's always a good idea to make sure that the SDK you're rolling back is actually available in the Maven repository. So in this case, we would look at Maven AEM SDK and we could see which ones are out there. So since we were looking at something available from 2022.2, we could click on this and take the actual version that is available on the repository. So in this case, you can see that it has a suffix to the end of it. So this is the one that we would want to provide, hypothetically. But we're not going to do that. We're just going to roll back to the one that the repository had and run it with an up-to-date version of AEM. So if we go back into AEM now and refresh our product information screen, I restarted my AEM instance with a fresh one in the background, and we do indeed have an up-to-date version that has 2022.4 as the SDK version, and I'm running a build right now to install this bundle into this AEM instance. So it's currently going through the analyzer, and hopefully when this is done, it will be a running version of the bundle. Okay, great. So this has now installed, and let's refresh our bundles screen here. And you can see that the Weak Insights project is now active. It's not just installed, which means that all of its dependencies have been met. So now let's give it another shot. So if we refresh our English page, which previously had an error, we have to relog in because this is a fresh AEM instance. Which also means it's cold, so it's going to take a second to open up. Okay, and there we go. So it did successfully install the package, and we no longer have an error. However, we can still see that some pieces of the site are missing. So for instance, there's clearly not a header on the site, and the header would be created from an experience fragment. The experience fragment is a core component, so presumably there's something wrong with the core component right now. The first thing that we can try whenever there is something wrong with something that's out of the box is to make sure we're using the latest version. Currently, the latest version of the core components is 2.18, and we can see that the converter has specified 2.8 for us. Either the converter or possibly maybe that's just what the original project was using. So yeah, the original project, I just opened the parent POM of the original project. It's 2.8. So let's go ahead and push this all the way to 2.18, run the build again, and see if that fixes anything for us. Finished here, and if we go back to our page now, what I will say is that in the background, I did run this build and the page wasn't cooperating. I believe that when we changed the core components version, there were some collisions that were happening in the back end. So what I had to do was I had to delete the AEM instance entirely and rebuild it. And now that we've got the AEM instance fresh, with only the core components version that we want, which is the latest one, when we refresh the page, we do indeed get a fully functioning weekend website. So there you have it, the weekend website, the version 0.02, the oldest one, has successfully been migrated from a repository that was intended for 6.5 to a repository structure that works in AEM as a cloud service.